I I was thinking about stories because I read a story recently, and it just made me wonder what isn't a good story. Like, is it the characters? Is it the events? Is it just how it makes you feel? Is a good story just something that achieves like a level of like synchronicity with you, right? Like if you read it and it just jive with you immediately off rip, right? Like, is that a good story? I think it's hard to tell what a good story is when you really think about it because the components are so out there. But I would argue that a good story is something that made you feel good. Like, obviously, right? Like, whether it had a good ending or not, like, you walked away with some kind of feeling of enjoyment, you know? Like, whether it was painful, whether you enjoyed that pain, I feel like that's what makes a good story. Honestly, the thing I'm going to talk about today is the opposite of that. I don't think it's a good story, but I do think it's a piece of art. So I read this manga, um, this comic called Shamo, and Shamo is another word for a fighting chicken, like fighting like those like the fighting hens, right? Them niggas that be fighting, like the hens that you just put in the cage and fight. I mean, usually that's pretty out of style, but that is a thing in some parts of the world, and I think it perfectly describes what the story's about. It's really dark. It's edgy. It's like it's your typical like shonen edge fest, right? It's just like grr gree, but in a lot of ways, it just makes you feel uncomfortable. The storytelling, the art, everything about the story just makes you feel bad. And most stories, the protagonist is someone likable, someone you can self project onto, and even if you can't project yourself on them, there's a sense of connection, right? You can understand. And in this story, there's somewhat a sense of connection. There's kind of like you can understand the main character, you can understand the protagonist, but fundamentally, he is not a good person. And most people could recognize this, right? It's strange, but I think that there aren't a lot of stories, or not enough stories, about characters who aren't likable. Shamo isn't just about a character who's not likable, though. He's despicable, one of the worst human beings on the planet. And there are people like that, but you never really think of them as the main character. You don't think about how people in situations react to bad people. Because in our minds, and in my mind, for the longest time, you only really think that good people have friends. That people who at least have likable traits have friends. And for the longest time, I just thought, why does the protagonist, Ryu Narushima, have friends? As a person, he's bad. Everything he is as a person is bad, right? And as the story progresses, it just kind of helps you to connect with Ryu as a character. But like not in any positive ways. Like you understand that society has dejected him. He's not loved. He's not cared. He was never cared for. But was he born or was he created? I feel like all the arguments I'm making are really dumb and bad. It's just it made me feel a lot, you know? But I can't say it's a good story. I can say that the author made me feel what he wanted me to feel, but in every sense, I didn't want to feel that. I didn't want to feel I didn't want to feel bad. Like I've read stories that are sad. I've read stories that are about like disgusting topics where there isn't a happy ending. But I don't think a happy or a sad ending really determine the level of enjoyment of a story, right? Like some people don't like sad endings and some people don't like happy endings, but like they have their merits. Shamo, even to the end, is not something you ever feel satisfied with. The entire journey is just painful, just dreadful. And sometimes it's not even the protagonist's intent to make you feel bad, right? I haven't summarized the story yet, so if you're still listening, I'm just gonna give you a brief run through. Shamo is a story about a 16-year-old who murders both of his parents in cold blood. Yeah, so he murders both of his parents in cold blood, but because he did it as a minor, he's allowed to keep on living, right? He's allowed, well, not allowed to keep on living, but he's allowed to go to prison for 2 years until he turns 18 and he's released. Now, in prison, he learns martial arts. He becomes a karate practitioner. And then when he's released, that teaching of violence kind of just superimposes on his life. And he just kind of uses karate and does bad things. That's all you need to know, really. But it's strange because normally you would think of a murderer as someone who's just purely evil. But when he gets to prison, he's this scrawny, small sapling of a child. He's like this little, like 16-year-old, like probably like 5'4", just bald head, just scrawny. Everyone in the prison can just push him around. He's nothing to anybody, right? And he learns karate to defend himself, but he's in a violent environment, so he becomes violent. Which is strange because you would think that the murderer who killed his parents was born violent, right? But if he was never given karate, then he would have never had the capacity or the strength to commit violence on the scale he does later. And even after all of the atrocious acts he's committed, even then, right? There are still times when he's done things that were bad and didn't mean to or didn't understand the context of why they were bad. And it's just strange because as someone who is a reader, as someone who's consuming literature, as someone who's like reading the manga, you want to be able to understand. You want to be able to know and to like understand where this character is coming from, but you can't. And as the series goes on, there are people who try to understand him, who try to reach out to him, who try to come into his world. And it's ranged from the best of life to the worst of life. But no matter what, every time they gaze into the abyss, it always stares back. And over time, the protagonist just starts to decay and just starts to be in pain. And it just hurts to watch. But he deserves it. He did it to himself. And it just makes me wonder whether I'm doing enough as a person, right? Whether I'm doing enough in my day-to-day life. Whether I'm a good enough human being. Whether I did what I'm supposed to do. It hurts because in Shamo, I see someone who, like a fighting hen, was conditioned to fight, but had violent tendencies at a young age. And then I see him grow into adulthood, him get his comeuppance, him get all the things he deserved. And then I have to ask, right? What about everybody else? What about all the people he hurt? Am I hurting the people around me without knowing? Am I a good enough person just because I think I'm doing good? Am I an okay person even when I'm not attempting to be a good person? And it's just, it hurts. And if just stop the video here if you don't want to be spoiled. But in the end, Ryu, the main character of this story, ends up dying in a forest in a nondescript way, in an uneventful way, just kind of dies. And then he just loses consciousness and dies. And that's it. You don't get to see any of the side stories that were happening at the time. You don't get any of the context of what happens after to his sister. to any of the other characters. It's just he dies, the end. And he dies in an unforgettable way in the middle of a forest while dreaming about a goat staring at him. And it's just, you always want to see this awful human being get their comeuppance, and the way that, like, it's just satisfactory, but it's just, he was suffering for all of his life, and up to the end, he was trying to get away from the life that had sucked him in, that life of fighting, that life that was only self-centered, the selfishness that brought so many people down. And in the end, he only died because he wasn't selfish, because he was attempting to be a good person, because he had something to live for. And he deserves it. By all means, he deserves it, but it just makes you think about, are you a good person? Just, are you a good person? Like, fundamentally, think about it. Even if you're doing good things, is it for the right reasons? Have you hurt people? Have you, just think about all your actions? Because it's just, you don't really think about these things until it's over, until you're at the end, until you're genuinely afraid of being alone, until all of your feelings just swarm you, until you finally are there. And that's someone who's relatively young, right? It's just, we all die. But is it better to die an extravagant death, to do all of these things, or to die alone, relatively quietly, whimpering in the forest? If you listened, I just wanted to get my thoughts out because I'm really stressed right now. But if you listened, if you found this entertaining, I'll leave a link to the manga in the description below, and I'm gonna just go to sleep. Everything's been stressful, a lot of police violence. I just wanted an outlet for my feelings and to talk about something that I feel have deeply about. Um, Besides the world going to shit currently. Have a good day. That's all I've got to say. Bye.